Good morning. I'm Miss Mina from Caroline County Public Library, and I'm going to read a story for you today. And I'm excited about this because the story is Curious George and the Summer Games. And you may not know this, but Miss Mina has a brother. And when we were kids, he was my little brother. He's 2 years younger than I am. And now this was in the 1970s, he had a Curious George stuffed animal, and it was his favorite thing in the whole wide world when he was a little boy. And one day he left it out in the rain, and it was tragic. But we found him, and we dried him, and he still stayed with my little brother for a long, long time. So we read lots of Curious George books. I don't remember reading this one, though, so I'm excited to read it with you. This is by Margaret and H.A. Rey, and it is Curious George and the Summer Games. Do you know what they're referring to when they say the Summer Games? They're referring to the Olympics. So maybe there'll be Olympic sports in here, or maybe just plain old summer games. So here's the opening page, the title page, and it tells us that this is the character. Curious George is the character that Margaret and H.A. Rey created, but this story was actually written by Monica Perez, and it was illustrated in the style of Margaret and H.A. Rey, in their style of drawing, and it was published by Houghton Mifflin. Interesting how much information we can get on the title page. Now let's read Curious George and the Summer Games. I'll read the pages and then I'll show them to you so that we can see them well. George was a little monkey who was good at a lot of things, especially being curious. What was all that commotion in the field near his home? You can see the houses in the background, and then here's the field, and there's a lot going on. And here is the man with the yellow hat, which is Curious George's friend. I think he takes care of Curious George. The man with the yellow hat told George, "That's the recreation center. Their staff is setting up for their summer field day event. Any kid in town can compete in sports, like volleyball or track and field, and each event has a prize, a medal, just like the Olympics." George wanted a medal, so he ran onto the field, and his friend quickly followed. There they are. George dropped his bag and ran to the field, and the man with the yellow hat is running to keep up with him. He's probably going to have to stop and pick up that bag, or get George to come get it. "Come and join us, George. We're practicing for the competition next week." George's neighborhood friends were lined up in front of some of these strange-looking structures. I'll show you. They looked like huge staples sticking out from the ground. And here's one that you can see from the front. A kid named Lorenzo started running, and as soon as he reached the first metal bar, he leaped over it. Then he jumped over another and another. "You want to try the hurdles?" the man asked George. The little monkey nodded eagerly. The hurdles were too high to leap over. George still had fun, but this really wasn't the sport for him. So this is Lorenzo jumping the hurdles. And you see how he puts one foot over first and then the other one. He sort of leaps over it. And then here is where Curious George was trying, but he figured out that he does a handstand better than jumping because they're so tall. Not the sport for him, I say. Let's see. The pages are stuck together. George was curious about many different sports. Next, he tried the long jump and badminton. Both sports were harder than he thought they would be. Many of the kids had been participating in them for months, and they were hard to beat. So here he is. He's trying the long jump. You take a run, and then there's a point at which you take the jump and you land in the sand. And depending on where you land, they measure to see how far you jump. And here's badminton. It does look like he was having a tough time. With badminton, you have a racket and the little birdie. Or there are other names for it, but we'll just call it a birdie that you hit back and forth instead of a ball. The man with the yellow hat said, "Playing sports is about being fit and healthy, George, and having fun. It's not about winning." Well, this made George feel much better. And since summer games were happening next weekend, George had the rest of the week to practice. So there's the man with the yellow hat telling him, it's all about having fun and learning how to play the game, and then it helps us stay fit and healthy. So he did practice every day. The next day, George joined a volleyball team. He was good at diving for the ball. "Go, George!" his teammates shouted. But instead of returning the ball over the net with one bump, he grabbed it and ran. Oh no! George would need to learn so many rules about this game before he could play. Have you ever played volleyball? There are certain ways that you hit the ball to send it over the net and back. George caught it and ran. Not so good, huh? He does have a lot of rules to learn. On Wednesday, George returned to the field. He was curious about the relay race. He saw kids taking turns running with a baton. A baton is something like a little special stick that you hold in your hand. They were running with a baton around a large oval track. That didn't look hard. George was assigned the anchor leg, which means he would run last. In a relay race, you might run 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people run one race. So each one only has to take one lap instead of having to run all 4. And when they get to the end of their lap, they hand the baton to the next person, and that person runs until they finish. So George was assigned the anchor leg, which meant that he would run last. But he didn't understand that he could only take the baton from his teammate. He took the first baton that came close. He took one from another team. Oh no! There he goes. Lots of rules to learn, George. George spent 2 more days practicing his skills with other... Oops, I missed one. I missed a page. They stuck together. Let's back up. The track coach steered the little monkey in the direction of the gymnastics area. George tried the balance beam first. He was naturally good at keeping his balance without wobbling. And that, my friends, is very hard to do because this balance beam, if you've never been on one, it's very small. It's not wide. It's big in that it's long, but the place where you put your feet is very, very tiny. If you notice, it's about the same size as his foot. But he was good at balancing. That's good. He could swing on the rings without getting tired. That looks like a monkey kind of thing to do. And he was so fast on the pommel horse that he got applause. People clapped for him. He had found his sport. Gymnastics. Woo. That was not my sport either, but my daughter sure loved gymnastics. George spent 2 more days practicing his skills with the other gymnasts on the West Street Wonder team. Here they are practicing. They're on the bars. And here he is on a balance beam again. Stella, one of the younger members, showed him how to pirouette, to turn around like a ballerina on the balance beam. I bet you're as excited as I am, she said to George. It's my first competition, too. And then finally, the day of the summer games arrived. Look at that. Doesn't that look exciting? You have the track for running. There's the finish line and the hurdles. There's a tent where they are doing some kind of dancing, it looks like. There's all kinds. There's volleyball, there's the long jump, and here are the gymnastics. So exciting. So exciting. And guess what? Gymnastics was up first. George enjoyed cheering on his teammates, even though he did sometimes forget that he shouldn't be doing cartwheels on the sidelines and distracting the audience. But look, it sure looks like the audience is enjoying his antics. But look, it's Stella who is up next. She looks a little worried. Let's find out what happened. Stella hadn't started her routine. She was nervous that there were so many faces watching from the stands. Oh, wow, I didn't notice that before. There are a lot of people watching. That could be a little unnerving. George heard someone say Stella had stage fright. He knew exactly what to do. Before anyone could tell him that it was against the rules, he climbed up onto the beam and did a handstand. Look. And Stella smiled at him. He relaxed her a little bit. George then held out his hand, and Stella stretched her arms out and bowed. Then she did a perfect pirouette, and George mirrored her. He calmed her down. And then he said, look, it's your turn. And she did the perfect pirouette. As long as Stella kept her eyes on George, she didn't feel nervous. She finished her routine to grand applause. How fantastic that was. Now, there wasn't a medal for doubles gymnastics, for two people doing the same routine as a double. But there were ribbons for team effort. This was just fine with George. Making new friends and learning a sport had been the best part of the summer games. And besides, there's always next year. So you can see that some of the kids got medals, and they gave him a special one for just helping. Isn't that fun? That was great. And inside the back of this book, if you have any hoops, like hula hoops and jump ropes, you can play a game called Hoops and Jumps. And if you don't have that, maybe you can improvise and use something else. Or maybe at camp you could do it one day. So I hope you've enjoyed Curious George and the Summer Games. Play some games outside. Take care.